Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the session which marks the Jaipur launch of the Murty Classical Library of India. We are very, very lucky to have not only Rohan Murty, the person who made the series possible, and Sheldon Pollock, the general editor. We also have 5 speakers who will today read from each of the selections in both the original Indic language and then the English translation. So what we want to do today is treat you all to the wonderful sounds and accents of different languages from India. We have tried today to keep this a very multilingual session, so each of us will actually be speaking in 2 or more languages, and you will all understand a little bit and maybe not all of it, but it's to get you excited about this library, which is a great celebration of the different languages of India. So our first speaker is going to be Rohan Murty, a man who made it possible, who, by the way, happens to have a PhD in computer science and is a junior fellow at the Harvard Society of Fellows, but still manages to find a great love of classics. The next speaker will be Navtej Sarna, who will read Bulle Shah in the Punjabi, Rakhshanda Jalil, who will read Abul Fazl in Persian, Maithree Wickramasinghe, who will read Terigatha in Pali, then Yatindra Mishra, who will read from the Surdas in Braj Bhasha, and finally Sheldon Pollock will have a few general comments about the series. So, in the spirit of bilingualism, I will say, Shomobato, Bhadra Mohodoy এবং মহিলাজন আপনাদের সবাইকে স্বাগত জানাই। জয়পুর সাহিত্য উৎসবের এই অনুষ্ঠানে যোগদান করার জন্য আমাদের আন্তরিক ধন্যবাদ। আমি একটি প্রাণবন্ত অধিবেশনের আশা রাখছি। অধিবেশনের শেষে একটি প্রশ্নোত্তরের পালা থাকবে। If you didn't understand, Q&A will be at the end of this session. Okay? ধন্যবাদ।
Hello. There we go. ವಂದನೆಗಳು ನನಗೆ ತುಂಬಾ ಖುಷಿ ಆಗಿದೆ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಮುಂದೆ ಮಾತನಾಡುವುದಕ್ಕೆ ಇವತ್ತು. I just said I'm very happy to be speaking in front of all of you in my mother tongue Kannada. I truly am very, very happy to be here. This is not a venue for somebody like me, in the sense somebody of my training and background. As Sharmila mentioned, I'm a computer scientist. I just thought I'd sort of give you a very brief glimpse of why I think this series is important and relevant, and use myself as a case study. And I think I'm a very average case study, and by definition, average is quite common. So when I was a PhD student in computer science at Harvard, it was really through a series of fortuitous accidents that I ended up in a graduate course in Mimamsa philosophy from about 1500 years ago, maybe actually 1300 years ago, where we read Kumarila Bhatta's Shloka Vartika on the determination of perception and the subsequent debates between Mimamsa philosophers and Buddhist philosophers. Now, for somebody like me who grew up in Bangalore, went to an English medium school, stuff like this was quite extraordinary, because I had no clue. Of course, one would hear, but I had no clue of the details of what a rich intellectual tradition that ancient India had. And not just, how rich it was, but also how diverse it was. We read philosophy, we read in graduate school through various courses that I took. We read ancient Indian grammar, we read science, mathematics, and so on, and literature, of course. And these were not the kinds of content that I knew about ancient India. In fact, if I had to say, if I could root the sense of history that many of my friends and I had from our limited education in India, I think it would be around 13th or 14th century. We had no idea 2,000 years ago, how did people in this land live, how did they write, read, what did they care about, what was philosophy like, what was polity like, what was science like, mathematics like, and so on. So this sort of an experience of studying about ancient India was quite transformative for me personally. And it was made possible because there were some extraordinary scholars who had made one-off efforts to translate various specific texts. And so then I began to think, saying, look, if I could benefit from something like this, and I could find an incredible pride and joy in knowing that we all come from such a rich civilization, an intellectually rich civilization, then perhaps there are many others like me. And then again, through a series of other fortuitous accidents, I ended up meeting Professor Sheldon Pollock and Sharmila Sen from Harvard University Press. And that's how the series really began. And so my real hope and desire for this series is that there'll be so many more people like me who are out there who don't yet know enough about where we come from and who don't yet have sufficient pride in about where we come from. And so in some small way, this series, I think it's a sliver, will probably help many people like me and others recognize that, you know, this land produced extraordinary scholarship of depth and diversity. And so I hope that many of you will read our books. And this is not a one-year effort. This is a multi-year effort. We hope to last at least as long as, let's say, Harvard University survives. So let's hope at least 100 years. And we hope to publish on average about maybe 4 to 5 books. So we'll do about maybe 500 books in 100 years. And if you really think of it in the grand scheme of things, it's a very small sliver because, you know, we're doing multiple languages, multiple genres. So there are probably hundreds of millions of books that we will never touch. But hopefully this is a first step. And I personally feel very proud when I finished a book and a half of the first 5. And I feel incredibly proud to be a person who belongs to this civilization, who's come from this part of the world, and to know that people here produce things that are no less than Greek or Latin, which at least in the universities I studied at were pretty much the definition of classics. So I hope, you know, many of you can share this experience the way that I've had it and tell others about it. And with that, I'll move on, I guess, to the actual content. Thank you.
Good afternoon. And going by the tradition that has been set, I'll start with Punjabi and keep going into English on Bulle Shah. Bulle Shah da janm 17ਵੀਂ ਸਦੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਉੱਚ ਪਿੰਡ ਜੋ ਅੱਜ ਦੇ ਪਾਕਿਸਤਾਨ ਵਿੱਚ ਪੈਂਦਾ ਹੈ ਉੱਥੇ ਹੋਇਆ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਸ਼ਾਹ ਇਨਾਇਤ ਕਾਦਰੀ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਣਾ ਮੁਰਸ਼ਦ ਸਮਝ ਕੇ ਸੂਫੀ ਤਰੀਕਾ ਅਪਣਾਇਆ ਔਰ ਇਹ ਸੂਫੀ ਭਾਵਨਾਵਾਂ ਹੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਕਾਫੀਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਜਾਉਂਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ। ਧਾਰਮਿਕ ਕੱਟੜਪਨ ਦਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਖੰਡਨ ਕੀਤਾ ਔਰ ਬਹੁਤ ਇੱਕ ਸਿੱਧੇ ਔਰ ਸੁਭਾਵਿਕ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਰੱਬ ਨੂੰ ਲੱਭਣ ਦਾ ਰਸਤਾ ਦੱਸਿਆ। Bulle Shah is believed to have been born in 1680 in Uch village of Bahawalpur district, now in Pakistan. He turned to Sufism under the guidance of Shah Inayat Qadri, and it is the Sufi tradition which illuminates his kafis and his poetry. He was a strong critic of religious orthodoxy and stressed simplicity and humanism in spiritual search for God. The first poem, or half a kafi, is about the legendary Punjabi heroine Soni, who goes to the banks of the Chenab and does not know how to cross to meet her lover Mahibal. She used to cross on the strength of an earthenware pot, a matka, from one bank of the other through the dangerous waters. Tang mai di jalliyan ਨਿਤ ਕਾਗ ਉਡਾਵਾਂ ਕੱਲੀਆਂ ਕੋਡੀ ਦਮੜੇ ਪਲੇ ਨਾ ਕਾਈ ਪਾਰ ਵੰਜਣ ਨੂੰ ਮੈਂ ਸਦਰਾਈ ਨਹੀਂ ਮਲਾਹਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਅਸ਼ਨਾਈ ਚੇੜਾ ਕਰਾਂ ਵਲੱਲੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਚੰਡਲ ਦੇ ਸ਼ੋਰ ਕਿਨਾਰੇ ਘੁੰਮਣ ਫੇਰ ਵਿੱਚ ਠਾਠਾਂ ਮਾਰੇ डुब डुब मोए तारू पारे, जो शोर करा तां चलियां। नैच चंडल दे डूंगे पाए, तारू गोते खांदे आए। माही मैंडे पार सिधाए, मैं केवल रही हां कलियां। In English, I am consumed with desire for my beloved. I am anxiously standing in wait for him. I do not have even the smallest coin on me. I long to cross over to the other side. I am not on friendly terms with the boatmen. Foolishly, I get into quarrels with them. There is commotion on the banks of the river Chenab. The waves are surging in whirlpools. Strong swimmers keep drowning here. If I make a noise, I go crazy. The tributaries of the river Chenab are deep. Swimmers dive deep into them. My beloved has gone across. I am left here alone. Another short kafi in Punjabi first. Dil loche mahi yaar nu, ik has has gallan kardiyan, ik rondiyan tondiyan pardiyan. कहो फुली बसंत बहार नू, दिल लोचे माही यार नू। मैं नाती तोती रह गई, एक गंड माई दिल पै गई। पाल आइए हार श्रृंगार नू, दिल लोचे माही यार नू। मैं कमली कीती दूतियां, दुख केर चुफेरे लीतियां। कर आ माई दीदार नू, दिल लोचे माही यार नू। बुल्ला शौ मेरे कर आया, मैं कुट रांझण गल लाया। दुख गए समुंदरों पार नू, दिल लोचे माही यार नू। My heart desires my dear beloved. Some girls laugh and talk, some weep bitterly and suffer. Just tell the blossoming spring, my heart desires my dear beloved. I am left here all bathed and washed. My beloved has taken against me. Into the fire with all this finery, my heart desires my dear beloved. My enemies have made me mad. Griefs have surrounded me on all sides. Come home, beloved, and let me see you. My heart desires my dear beloved. Bulla, the Lord has come to my house. I have held Ranja in a tight embrace. My griefs have vanished across the ocean. My heart desires my dear beloved. Thank you.
Khawateen o Hazrat, Adab, ladies and gentlemen, greetings. I will read from Akbarnama, a text by Abul Fazl. Abul Fazl 17वीं सदी के एक बहुत अहम Indo-Persian chronicler थे. The text is in prose, but I have chosen a very short verse passage. I've chosen it because it's self-contained. It talks about Humayun's yearning for a son and a successor. The Farsi is as follows. खुदावंदा बेनूरे शमाए ज़ातत, बेगौहर हाय दरियाए सिफातत, बेआन पाकान के चूँ गुलपाक रुस्तंद, दरू अज़ चश्मे खुर्शीद शुस्तंद, के ताजे दौलतम रा गौहरी बख्श, से पहरे रफतम रा अख्तरी बख्श, जे माही दे शबिस्ताने मरानूर के जुल्मत हाय आलम रा कुनद्दूर, जे खुर्शीदे बरफरोज़ां वजूदम के उफ्ताद नौहे से पहरे अंदर सुजूदम, बक़ाई दे बेजाने गम पजीरम के गर सद रह अजल आयद नमीरम. The translation by Wheeler M. Thaxton is as follows. O Lord, by the light of the candle of thy essence, by the pearls of the sea of thy qualities, by the immaculate ones that sprang forth as pure as flowers, whose interiors were washed in the spring of the sun. Bestow a pearl upon the crown of my fortune. Give a star to the firmament of my exaltedness. Shed light upon my dark corner through a moon that banishes darkness from the world. Brighten my existence with a sun that will bring the 9 celestial spheres to their knees before me. Give life to my suffering soul that, though death come 100 times, I die not. Shukriya.
I have been given the mandate and the privilege of reciting from the Therigathas, or the verses of the first ordained Buddhist monks. Composed more than 2 millennia ago, they constitute examples of ancient women's writing, full of personal and religious insights. For this afternoon, I have chosen a Gatha by Theri Khema, who has been, during her lay life, Queen Khema, and who had narcissistically been obsessed by her own beauty and her figure until she realizes, or rather recognizes, their impermanence. In this Gatha, Mara, who can be considered the personification of death, the evil one, or the tempter, propositions Khema in order to test her spiritual resolve. I will now recite Khema's Therigatha in Pali. Daharathavam rupavati ahampi daharo yuva panchankangikena tureyena ehi keme ramassame. Imina putikayane aturene pabuguna atiyami harayami kamatamha sumanhata. Sattisulu Pamma Kama Kandasam Adikuttana Yam Tavam Kama Karanti Brusi Arati Dani Samama Sabbatta Vihata Nandi Tamko Datto Padalito Evam Janahi Papami Nihato Tavam Asi Antaka Nakattani Namasatta Aggim Parikaramvane Yathabu Kamma Ajanta Bala Suddhami Amananda Ahankakaho Namassati Sambuddhanam Purisattamam Parimutta Sambuddukehi Sattu Sankariti. Let me introduce the Gatha in Sinhala now, which is not an Indian language. I come from Sri Lanka, so it's one of my languages. Meeta wasara 2000කට පමණ පෙර ලියවූ ලොව පළමුව උපසම්පදාවලත් බෞද්ධ භික්ෂු වහන්සේලා විසින් රචිත පද පෙළක් වූ තෙරි ගාථා මාලව කොටසක් ඉදිරිපත් කිරීමට මම දැන් බලාපොරොත්තු වෙනවා. පෞද්ගලික සහ ආගමික ප්‍රඥාවන් පිරුණු මේ ඉපැරණි ගැහැණියන්ගේ රචන කෞශල්‍ය මින් විදැහි දැක්වේ. And finally, I will recite Khema's Therigatha in English. Firstly, Mara says to her, "You are young and beautiful, and so am I. Come, Khema, let's enjoy each other, make music together." Khema replied, "This foul body, sick, so easily broken, vexes and shames me. My craving for sex has been rooted out. The pleasures of sex are like swords and stakes. The body, senses, and the mind, just the chopping block on which they cut. What you call the delights of sexual pleasure are no delights for me now. What you take as pleasures are not for me. The mass of mental darkness is split open. Know this, evil one, you are defeated, you are finished. You honor the stars, look to them for guidance. You tend the fire in the forest. Fools, you thought all that could be relied on, all the while not knowing what really is. But I honor the Buddha, best of all men. By doing what the Buddha taught, I am freed from all sufferings. Thank you.
I am Mrunalini, reading from Telugu. I'm mentioning my name because I think it got bypassed in the introduction. So I'll be reading from a 16th century Telugu classic, Manu Charitra. Alasani Peddana is the poet who wrote this poem. Telugu Sahityanlo Alasani Peddananu Andhra Kavita Pitamahudu ani vyavaharistaru. Just a bit of my Telugu. Alasani Peddana is considered to have introduced the genre Prabandha, which went on to produce more than 100 works in the following 2 or 3 centuries. This book is about the birth of Manu, who wrote the Dharma Shastra. And the present scene, the present context of the scene that I am reading out now is regarding Pravara, a Brahmin who goes to Himalayas, and there he sees a Gandharva Kanya, Varudhini. He just looks at her and she falls in love with him. This Varudhini is the grandmother of Manu. The story follows later, but the only scenes here are Varudhini falling in love with Pravara. అతడావాత పరంపరా పరిమళ వ్యాపార లీలన్ జనాన్విత మిచ్చోటని చేరబోయి కనియన్ విద్యుల్లతా విగ్రహన్ శతపత్రేక్షణన్ చంచరీక చికురన్ చంద్రాస్యన్ చక్రస్థనిన్ నతనాభిన్ నవలాన్ ఒకానొక మరున్నారీ శిరోరత్నమున్. He followed the fragrance carried by the breeze, wave after wave, thinking, there are people here. Then he saw her, a body gleaming like lightning, eyes unfolding like flowers, hair black as bees, a face lit up with beauty, proudly curved breasts, a deep navel, a woman, but from another world. Amala Manimaya Nijamandiranganaastha Taruna Sahakara Moola Vitardi Meeda, Sitala Nilamalaya, Asina Yaina, and Nilimpabja Mukhiyu, Ayavasaramuna. She was sitting on a raised platform at the foot of a young mango tree in the courtyard of her house, which was built of precious gems. And as a cool wind gently blew against her face, Tatanitam Babhoga Dhavalamsukamuloni Angadattapu Kavirangu Valana, Shishikanta Manipethi Jajuvaraga, Kaya Luttunga Kuchapali Nattamilla, Tarunanguli Dhuta Tantrisvanambutu, Jilibili Patalu Muddulu Natimpa, Alapagati Chokki Aramodpu Kanudoyi, Ratiparavasya Vibhramamu Telupa, ప్రౌఢి పలికించు గీత ప్రబంధములకు కమ్రకర పంకరుహరత్న కటక జనజ్జనత్ స్ఫూర్తి తాళమానవులు గొలుప ఇంపు తొడుకత్త వీణ వాయింపుచుండి. The red skirt inside the white half saree that veiled her thighs turned the glowing moonstone beneath her red, and the gouts of the veena rubbed against her firm breasts as her delicate fingers seemed to caress sweet music from the strings, and she was languid with longing, her eyes half closed as if flowing with the song, she was lost in making love beyond herself with pleasure. While the bracelets on her hands chimed the rhythm of the song, she was singing with expert skill, and there was joy, brilliant joy, as she played on. Abbura padutoda nayanambujamul vikasimpa, kanti pelgubbi kaneenakil vikasitotpala kantula krummarimpaga, గుబ్బ మెరుంగు చంగవ గగుర్పొడువన్ మదిలోన కోరికల్ గుబ్బటిలంగ చూచే నలకూబరు సన్నిపున ధరామరున్. Amazed, she opened her eyes wide and light poured out. The pupils blossomed like flowers and her breast came alive as she thrilled to the sight of that Brahman, a god on earth, while thoughts went wild in her mind. And the last poem. Chuchi ఝళన్ ఝళత్ కటిక సూచిత వేగ పదార విందయై లేచి కుచుంబులం తురుము లేనడు మల్లల నాడ అయ్యడన్ పూచిన ఒక్క పోకడును బోధియ చేరి విలోకన ప్రభావీచికలన్ తదీయ పదవీ కలశాంబుధి వెల్లి గొల్పుచున్. She saw him, stood up and walked towards him, the music of her anklets marking the rhythm, her breasts, her hair, her delicate waist trembling, stood by a smooth areca tree as waves of light from her eyes flooded the path that he was walking. Thank you.
ब्रजभाषा के महत्वपूर्ण कवि सूरदास, जो हमारी हिंदी कविता के भी एक महत्वपूर्ण कवि माने जाते हैं। मैं सूरसागर से उनका एक पद पढ़ रहा हूँ। उसके पहले एक छोटा सा परिचय सूरदास के बारे में। भक्ति काल के ये महत्वपूर्ण कवि हैं हिंदी के, और भक्ति काल की धारा ही शुरू हुई जिन दो ग्रंथों से, उज्ज्वल नीलमणि और दूसरा गोपाल तापनीय उपनिषद, वहाँ से ये परंपरा निकल के आई। और सूरदास वल्लभाचार्य द्वारा स्थापित अष्टछाप के प्रमुख कवि माने जाते हैं। जयपुर से बहुत नज़दीक है नाथद्वारा, वहाँ गोपाल की 8 याम सेवा के लिए वल्लभाचार्य ने 8 प्रमुख कवि, कीर्तनीय और वाग्यकार नियुक्त किए थे, जिनमें सूरदास के अलावा परमानंद दास, नंददास, कुंभनदास, चतुर्भुजदास, कृष्णदास, गोविंद स्वामी और छीत स्वामी प्रमुख हैं। सूरदास को 5वें स्थान पर जो अष्टयाम सेवा है उसमें उत्थापन सेवा के लिए वल्लभाचार्य ने नियुक्त किया था। ये देखना महत्वपूर्ण है कि अष्टछाप के सांगीतिक पदों को पुष्टि मार्ग में मंत्रों का स्थानापन्न माना जाता है, अर्थात जो संगीत के गेय पद हैं उन्हें मंत्र सिद्धि प्राप्त है, ऐसा कहते हैं। और ये भी महत्वपूर्ण है कि यह परंपरा हवेली संगीत का प्रणयन करती है। हम सभी जानते हैं कि सूरदास कृष्ण के बाल, लीला, विनय, श्रृंगार, उत्सव और शरणागति के पद रचने में अप्रतिम माने जाते हैं। मैं भ्रमर गीत का सूरसागर का ये पद पढ़ता हूँ। दिन दिन को सहे वियोग दिन दिन, नाहिन यह शरीर शशि मेरो, इते बिरह जुगजोग दिन दिन, सचि स्रक कुसम सुगंध सेज रचि, बसन कुमकुमा बोरी दिन दिन, नलनी दलिनी दूरी करी उरतें, कंचुकी कै बंध छोरी दिन दिन, बन बन बसत मोर चात्रिग पिक, मधुपनि सो कही आऊ दिन दिन, उदित चंद चंदन चढ़ाई शशि, त्रिविधि समीर बहाऊ दिन दिन, रटिपिय नाव नंद नंदन कौ, श्रवण सुनाई सुनाई दिन दिन, तौ देशत तन होमि मदन मुष, मिलिहों माधव जाई दिन दिन। सूरदास स्वामी कृपाल चित, जानी जुबति की रीत दिन दिन, तच्छनि प्रकट भय गोकुलपति, सुमिरि पुरातन प्रीति दिन दिन, दिन दिन को सहे वियोग दिन दिन। जॉन एस हवाई के सुरोशन से ये इस पद का अनुवाद। Who can stand such a separation day by day? Not this body of mine, my friend. It's not fit for the fever of being apart. So make me a garland, spread a fragrant bed, drench my clothes in saffron, pull away the lotus petals from my breast, loosen the string of my bodice, call for the peacocks, the chataks and cuckoos, and honeybees that dwell throughout the woods. When the moon rises, plaster me with sandal, friend, rouse the cool, gentle, sweet-smelling breeze, murmur the beloved name of Nandanandan, and chant it in my ear. Once I see my body as a fire sacrifice. To Madan's mouth, I will be going to meet Madhava. The master of Surdas is merciful of mind, and he knows young women's ways. At the very instant he appeared Gokul's Lord, remembering an ancient love, who can stand such separation day by day? Dhanyavad.
Kan prachamaha suraswarge nivasamo vayam bhuvi kim va kavyarasah swadu kim va swadiyasi sudha. The gods are in heaven and we live here on earth, so whom can we ask? What is more beautiful, the rasa of poetry or the drink of immortality? I did not write that. I wish I had. But you had a little taste of the rasa of kavya this afternoon from our wonderful presenters who very graciously came today to read from some truly extraordinary work produced in this country over the last 2,500 years. You heard Bulleh Shah, a poet of extraordinary vision that truly transcends the divisions of today. You heard the words of perhaps the greatest stylist in the Persian language, prose stylist, Abul Fazl, who produced the greatest history in the Persian language. You heard the oldest women's poetry in the world, produced by the Terrys in the 3rd or 4th century BC. You heard the greatest court poet of the Vijayanagar Empire, Pedana, who wrote at the request of Krishnadeva Raya in the early 16th century and invented an entirely new type of Telugu poetry. And finally, probably most familiar to you, you heard Sur, the Surya of Hindi poetry, poetry that was edited from the oldest manuscript available of Sur's work and translated by a superior translator, John Hawley. I should actually mention that other translators, a few were named. Charles Hallisey translated the Pali material, Narayana Rao and David Shulman, the Telugu material, Wheeler Thaxton, the Abul Fazl, and finally Christopher Shackle, the Bulleh Shah. It was an extraordinary moment 6 years ago when Sharmila and I were able to meet with Rohan Murty, a young man whose vision and generosity far exceed his age. He was 28 at the time when we met, and he recognized the importance of this project for not just the people of India or South Asia, but for readers and friends and lovers of poetry and literature and thought around the world, and made this library possible. I hope that you'll be able to look at our books and enjoy them and learn from them. We will be publishing in the next 5 years or 6 years something on the order of 40 books in 12 languages and 10 different scripts, in what is undoubtedly the most ambitious publishing program ever undertaken by a university press. And the Harvard University press people have done a truly amazing job at producing these books. And you'll see that they're available at a price which is absolutely incredible. So I'm delighted to welcome you to the Murty Classical Library of India. I'll stop here and see if we can spend a few minutes, we only have a few minutes, on questions and answers. Thank you.
we have. Okay, we have a few minutes for some questions and answers, and Sheldon Pollock is here in his capacity as general editor to answer some questions, as well as anything you might want to address to any of the speakers here. We'll start by, let's see some hands here in the front. Gentleman in the front, go ahead.
Hi everyone. Hello. Hi everyone. As Rohan mentioned, the Indian school system and the university system, we don't get to know more about our culture, and are not actually we do not actually engage with the languages of India at large. Even if we read about them, we mostly read about them in English. So how can academics be changed in a way so that we inculcate more languages and they be taught at a larger level? That's a general question. Secondly, will this project, the Murty Library project, look for translating, will translate these works into modern Indian languages? Some of the translation, will they be done in Hindi or other languages so that they are accessible to other people in the country?
Thank you.
Well, those are some of the key questions that are driving the library forward. First, the sense that the people of India and in other parts of South Asia have in a sense been alienated from their own literary traditions, and how there's a long history to that. Tomorrow morning with Girish Karnad there'll be a conversation about such matters, and I'd be happy to explore them in greater detail. But here is one of the key points about the library. We want this not just to be a celebration of the great literature of India and the rest of South Asia, but as an introduction to the actual languages themselves. We provide introductions, we provide annotations, we provide the best possible text and the highest standards of scholarship. So our hope is that young people will be enthused, animated, encouraged, driven, obsessed with learning the languages that we're providing instruction for. The bigger question is, you know, as far as translations outside of English, at the moment we don't have any plans to do that, but who knows? A century is a long time, and maybe we'll evolve. Thank you for your question.
I'll just add to what Professor Pollock said. I'm sure you've probably had the same experience I've had. So we went to school, we read Shakespeare, we read Robert Frost, we read Tolstoy, we read P.G. Wodehouse, we read Charles Dickens. We even read Oh Captain, My Captain, Walt Whitman, about the American Civil War. All of it is wonderful. I would not for a minute say we should not read any of these great pieces of work. But here's a way to make a tangible change in a very tangible way, which is hopefully sometime soon, schools will have an option to say, we can either read Robert Frost, or maybe in our school we'll choose one of these books. Or if not these books, books like these, right? And maybe some schools will choose to teach their students some poetry from classical India. So maybe that's one very tangible way to get going from an education perspective.
Let's take someone from the back. Okay, from the back, yes.
Hello. I wanted to ask, hundreds of languages, thousands of dialects, millions of manuscripts. How do you go about selecting? How do you choose what to leave out?
Another wonderful question. You know, the people of India themselves over many centuries have developed their own sense of what is important. I just mentioned Sur as the Surya of Hindi literature. That's an old verse that you find in Hindi, and it suggests that Sur needs to be in the Murty Classical Library. There are other traditions of canonization, and those are the first of the books that we're going to be choosing. But there are also books that have fallen off the map of literary history in South Asia, and the Therigatha is a good example. There is no manuscript of the Therigatha in India. The texts were preserved in Burma, Thailand, and Sri Lanka. But it and other texts like it have suggested themselves to modern scholars as important, even transformational works in Indian literary history, and those are going to be part of the library. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, if we had centuries and centuries of time, we would have everything. But we need to make a selection, and the selection first is going to be those texts that the Indian traditions themselves have considered key works in literary history.
Yes, in the front, over there.
Thank you very much. This is indeed, I want to congratulate you for bringing this forward. Nevertheless, I personally feel that the problem is that unless we bring back civilizational studies into academia, this will really not take off the way it should. So I think that that's the real issue in India, you know, that we are taught everything about all over the world, but that which is indigenous to our culture. So I personally feel that since you already have a network, Harvard University should be collaborating with Indian universities to start courses where we can read our languages and possibly, you know, go into translation studies, etc. So I think that is a bigger question, Rohan, and I think your foundation can definitely, you know, pursue this with the Prime Minister.
No, I broadly agree with what you have said. I feel the pinch of what you have said. I think many people here feel the pinch of what you have said. I mean, broadly speaking, my worry is this, you know, 50 years from now or 100 years from now, Professor Pollock has even written about this. I think you have an article titled A Crisis in the Classics, right? What will happen to the literature people will read here? Not just, I'm using the word literature rather loosely, because, I mean, take any of these languages, right? Or take, I'll take my own mother tongue as an example that Professor Pollock knows very well, which is Old Kannada. I don't know anybody in my generation, in my social circle, now maybe that is limited, who studies Old Kannada or who knows Old Kannada. And so in 50 years from now, we will, or 100 years from now, we will no longer know any Old Kannada. And then what? Our sense of history restarts at, you know, Karnataka, for example, existed only from 18th century and before there was no Karnataka, right? And that, I think, is very deeply worrying, and that's sort of a trend. And that's true not just in literature, it's true in science, in mathematics, in pretty much everything. There are some things that this civilization has done that are very legitimate, that we should be very proud of, and things we have not done, or some things we have done which we should not be proud of. And unless some of these things, you know, there is some sort of a resurgence and a renaissance of some of these things, I personally worry as to, you know, what culture we'll be left with. I mean, I have my American friends, I admire them because they have roughly 350 years of history and they're very proud of it. I mean, we have 5,000 years of history. We ought to be very proud of that too, or at least parts of it for sure.
Let me just add that that the fact that we're talking about the problem of the classics at the Jaipur Literary Festival, we talked about the problem of the classics in Bangalore a couple of days ago. We talked about the problem of the classics, the Indian classics in Delhi a week ago, means that this conversation is finally starting, and I hope that it will be engaged in classrooms across the country. And with books like the Murty Classical Library available and more people becoming interested in classical studies, I think the sort of questions you raised are going to be addressed.
Yes, yes, the lady right there I'm pointing to. Is there a mic there for her? Mic in the middle. Yes.
This is, I think, a very, very commendable job. About 7 years ago, I was in correspondence with Professor Pollock, Hugh, in the context of a book that I had edited, along with 2 other people, on cultural diversity and linguistic plurality, in which we have 2 essays from your book on literary cultures in India, in South Asia. But the amount of resistance that we have had from mainly, it's an optional course, from mainly teachers of English in particular, because this is prescribed in English. I'm saying this only because it's pertinent to what is happening here now, what is planned to happen, which is that if it is classical literature getting translated in somewhat archaic classical languages, classical in nature, the young people find it very difficult to enter these texts, and so do the teachers. So my problem was that even if we prescribe Bulle Shah and some tribal verse and some, we have done it in that book. We have prescribed all this. But the entry points are very difficult because that culture is missing. So I'm wondering, should we plan to think in terms of using modern idiom, modern entry points of language where, for instance, even if there are plays like, for instance, Kirish Kannad's Hayavadna or Tuklak or something. So it's in modern idiom, so the entry points are there. The students and teachers are they find it easy to enter that. So have you thought about that?
You know, the quality of the translations that are appearing in the Murty Classical Library are a matter of great importance to us. And we have encouraged our authors, our translators, to achieve as accessible and contemporary an idiom as possible, while not descending into the colloquial. These books will be in print for a very long time, and we need to maintain a certain sort of idiom that will last. That said, it's also important for kids to realize something about the fascination with what's difficult. Here's what I mean. I received a phone call from somebody at the Wall Street Journal who was doing a story about the Murty Library. And he said, I read part of Abul Fazl, and it goes on and on about Akbar's astrological chart, and it was kind of dull. I said, entering into the world of India's past is entering into a sometimes radically different consciousness. You're not reading Shobha De or Chetan Bhagat, or you're reading a world that's very unfamiliar, and it's precisely that unfamiliarity, precisely the, as I've said elsewhere, precisely the multiple ways of being a human being that one encounters in the Murty Classical Library. That is the difficulty that students need to learn to confront.
But I just want to add to what you just said. From my limited perspective, I also think it's an issue of mindset, because why is it that being able to understand what tuck boxes are when you read, say, Enid Blyton is okay? Because I remember reading Enid Blyton in school, and I had no idea what tuck boxes were. I had no idea how their whole system worked when I read Anne of Green Gables. I mean, let alone I was a boy, but I had no understanding or frame of reference, and yet we accepted it. When you read, Oh, Captain, My Captain, we didn't know who Abraham Lincoln was, apart from somebody in America, at least in my school. And yet, we made that leap and we accepted it. And time and again, we have accepted those leaps in the texts that we already studied in school. Our teachers have accepted it. We as students accepted it. So, from my perspective, this is a mindset issue. I would actually think reading, for somebody in India reading about will not have the same question about, astrology, because you have some frame of reference, right, that maybe somebody else did not have. So I think it's really, if maybe everybody talk about it and explain it and so on, and we take the same lens that we have towards current literature in schools, maybe it's not too hard.
My question is for Professor Pollock. I want to ask whether the project, the Murty Library project, only focuses on the praxis of translation, or does it intend to go into the theory of translation studies and, to ensure that the practical translations which are being churned out in the process are actually, worth its time? I mean, yeah, so we need to be trained as translators, or whoever joins the project. Yeah.
That's another excellent question. The endowment that Rohan so generously provided comes with a vision, a big vision about Indian literature. It's partly about producing books. It's partly about producing a brand new electronic form of the books, which we don't have time to talk about now, but it's also it also includes a long-range plan for thinking about training young scholars. And part of training young scholars is training them in the difficult art of translation. At the moment, all we can do is give you what we've done. We can't actually hold seminars right now, but in the fullness of time, the funds may be available to actually bring young people together to work through classical texts and to think about the very real and exciting problems of translation theory. Thank you for the question.
Okay, I think we are coming to the end of the session now, so thank you all very much. We wanted to give you a real taste of the books today. We wanted you to hear the 5 languages, and thank you again to Navtej Sarna, to Rakhshanda Jalil, to Maithree Wickramasinghe, to Mrunalini Chunduri, and to Yatindra Mishra for coming up today and reading to us these beautiful verses. Please take a look. The books are available. Dhanyavad, shukriya, dhanyavad agalu.